Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Jennifer Hammer. I am a anti-human trafficking coordinator at Rise and Ground, which is a nonprofit organization in New York City. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I'm super passionate about, which is um, young people that grow up in situations of trafficking. So, for example, there may be very typically from the work that I've done with survivors of sex trafficking, there may be a mother who either has a child as a result of the trafficking situation, whether that's the trafficker's child or whether or not it's a child that was born um, from perhaps like a John relationship. And then when young people grow up, and witness their parents that are involved in trafficking and prostitution and what some of the effects are or can be on these particular individuals. So one of the things that's really important to note is just that children born into trafficking can get overlooked. Like one of the things that I've noticed in my 13-year career working with survivors is just that um, these young people are exposed to very similar things that trafficking survivors are directly exposed to. So they may witness acts of violence where, they might see their mother getting physically assaulted by a trafficker, or in some cases, maybe some of the other individuals and women who are also being controlled by the same trafficker. And so what happens is that they may wind up going through a lot of the same thing, have that vicarious trauma, but then there's no specific services for them that help to address, all the things that they've gone through. And when going through to create this presentation, I noticed that there was also not a lot of research out there that specifically spoke to these individuals and what it is that they need in order to be able to heal and to move forward. And so when we're looking at the children of traffickers, we have some women and girls that, as mentioned before, may have children from the trafficker or could be as a result of a John, transactional relationship. And what happens that they're exposed to violence. They may see the exploitation of their mothers. Children of traffickers um, can experience difficulty integrating into square life, into regular going to school, and being a part of the general society and different things that are expected of them. Meanwhile, the things that they've witnessed over the course of their lives might be very different. They might have seen, instead of mom and dad getting up and going to a regular, job or a regular situation, mom and dad might be getting people together to go out to work on the track. And sometimes um, growing up in that situation, it seems normal at the time, where it seems like this is something that is a regular part of life. And then when they go out into the communities, they may begin to see that this is not what other families are potentially doing. And so trying to figure out where they fit in that whole situation can be really hard. And so one of the things that I've noticed in my work is that, they may also need that kind of support where they can connect with other young people who also have grown up in a similar situation. Um, and sometimes young people that are in this situation may side with their mother, or they may side with their father based on, you know, the manipulation and also coercion that is placed upon them, saying, trafficker might say, like, no, this is your mother's fault. Like, she chose to be in this situation and, she knew what she was getting herself into. And if you tell that to a young person, they as well may begin to believe it. And what happens is that they may side with one parent versus the other, when truly, in, just some of these scenarios that I'm bringing up, if the trafficker is the father, the parent in that situation, he would be the person who would be, manipulating the situation and also gearing the mother towards this life of exploitation, which he would be potentially benefiting from. So, when we're talking about exposure of trafficking on children, there can be two different types: those who are exposed to the lifestyle and those who aren't. So there are situations where people, like two parents, might be involved in a like trafficking ring, and the children have no idea what's going on. Like, parents keep it under wraps. They might not be exposing the child to it as much. Maybe they see and hear certain things, but not necessarily know what's going on. And then the other situation where they do know what's happening, they are very aware of what's going on. Um, and then they might have questions in either of those two situations, like, well, why does mom, stay out all night? Or why does mom have so many phone calls and have so many different appointments? Where is she going? What is she doing? And it could also be a situation where these children, if let's say they do know that their parent is involved in this, they might be encouraged or promoted to also fall into this lifestyle. This could be seen as like the family business, or this is something that you can also aspire to be, potentially a trafficker or potentially working in the sex industry or in this lifestyle. Um, in a lot of the cases that I've worked, where there's one trafficker and he may have um, a variety of women that are working under him, in those situations, they may call each other like wife in laws. And then sometimes, if the same women are with the same trafficker, he may have children with multiple women that he is in control of. And then in those cases, there could be multiple women that have half brothers and half sisters, which could also make the family dynamic a bit more complex, and could also make things a little bit more confusing or challenging for children to understand, like where they fit in and their family dynamics, which might be very different from traditional norms or from people at school or other friends and family members that they may come in contact with. So, switching gears a little bit to talk about the effects of the brain. So, as I was doing a lot of work with survivors, I became very interested in how trauma affects survivors of human trafficking specifically. And a lot of what you'll see here on the slide essentially talks about how trauma can affect a person's brain. And when talking specifically about trafficking survivors, they come into contact with a very high level of specific types of trauma where they don't know, let's say, from one day to the next, if they are safe. It's a very hyper vigilant, hyper aware situation. So when a survivor goes into a room with a buyer and the buyer is alone with them, you never know if that person may get violent, may decide to, hurt that person, may decide that they're not satisfied with the services that they received. And in those situations, it can cause um, violence where a buyer might try to take back money. He might decide that he is dissatisfied with the service and he wants his money back altogether. And so what happens is that um, individuals that are in this type of level of trauma where they um, are going in rooms with strangers multiple times a night or in cars with strangers multiple times a night, and potentially also dissatisfying the trafficker by not making their quota or the amount of money that they are set out to make. What happens is that they live very often in their reptilian and mammalian brain, where they're not really able to get out of that fight, flight, or freeze. And so a lot of what happens is that um, they can't really make the time for reasoning and complex thinking to think about how they could plan their next steps, how they can move forward and plan towards living a different way. And so if we are all in a room and we're sitting down and we're getting ready to pay attention to something, what happens is that our minds tune in. But first, we have to find out, do we feel safe? And if we feel safe, then we can move forward to start thinking about whatever it is we're about to view. But if our brains are constantly like, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And being triggered in that way, it's really hard for someone to get out of that frame of mind enough to start to really plan out their life, to figure out how to get a job, to figure out how to move forward with school and maybe some of the goals that they have in place. And so what I see is a lot of times I work with survivors that they have goals. They say, "Oh, I want to open my own business," or "I want to be able to um, start working with a specific population or go back to school." So they know very much what they want to do, but finding the steps, planning out how to get there, it can be really challenging. And so a lot of times, when I'm working with individuals who are coming out of trafficking situations, um, they could take anywhere from 5 to 10 years to really solidify these plans for how to move forward and how to develop coping mechanisms, how to get out of that trauma brain mindset and to be able to start moving towards action phases. And so, this is one of the things that I think can be the most challenging when folks are trying to say, like, oh, well, why didn't that person just leave that abusive situation? It's hard to plan how to leave an abuser if you're not able to get out of a particular survival mindset. Like, I'm in survival mode. I'm trying to figure out how I'm just going to eat today and please my trafficker so that he doesn't get violent with me. And so that it takes a level of safety and complex thinking in order for a person to get to a state of mind to start moving forward. Another population that can be affected is pregnant victims. So, in some cases, traffickers will force someone who's pregnant to continue to work in the sex trade. And so that could involve someone getting exposed to different types of either trauma, whether that be physical by the trafficker or the buyers, or it could also be potentially malnutrition, lack of access to prenatal care, vitamins, heightened stress levels, cortisol flooding um, the expecting mother's body, improper sleeping conditions. I've worked with survivors that they have a bunch of survivors sleeping on air mattresses on the floor, a bunch of survivors sleeping on the floor itself, and um, maybe are denied access to doctors because when someone goes to get health care, they may ask, well, how did you develop these bruises? How did you develop this malnutrition? Why aren't you seeking out more health care for your child? And when people begin to ask questions, it can put a trafficker in a situation where they may be concerned that someone will disclose the trafficking or put their business in jeopardy. And so, what happens is that traffickers will often discourage people who are pregnant from being able to access healthcare. And although the slide doesn't say this, also in addition to that, um, forced abortions can also be very heightened by traffickers who are either forcing through coercion or through physical force for someone to get an abortion, or for someone to feel that they have no other option because a trafficker has made different threats for them to do so. And so, these are also things that could potentially be dangers for someone. And then, if a buyer um, is the person who fathered the child, the trafficker will very often promote the abortion for that particular reason as well. Sometimes I've had survivors that they run away from traffickers when something like this has happened, like if they get pregnant because they know that the trafficker will force them to potentially abort the child. And then what happens after that is if they decide to come back to the trafficker later, then they maybe get like punished or severely beaten for that, for leaving the trafficker. for disobeying orders. And that can also be dangerous for a mother who has a young child. If now they come back to the trafficker with the child, the trafficker very often could be watching that child while the mother goes to work. And so, if the trafficker is also not a big fan of the fact that this person had the child, it could be dangerous for that child. They might be treated really badly. They might be cursed at. They might be called names, and that's just kind of like the tip of the different types of abuse that that child could experience from the trafficker. So, also focusing on mother-child relationships in the game. So, once a child is born of a trafficker or John, the mother may struggle with different types of complex emotions. Even if the child is from the trafficker, or maybe it it's not. Maybe the father could be someone else, like a buyer. Um, the mother may be torn between her maternal emotions versus the lifestyle, because the lifestyle doesn't make a lot of room for people to be the kind of mothers that they want to be. And so they may have to take a lot of focus out of motherhood and put it on the trafficker's needs, and also creating revenue for the trafficker. That's really what the trafficker's motivation is. And so sometimes the trafficker will use this child, if it's from the trafficker, as a chip, a bargaining chip, like, to say to the other people that are all in the same stable, if you do what you're supposed to, if you act like my bottom, you'll be able to also have children with me. And so what happens is that usually that person who is considered the bottom, or in some cases there may also be a top, those are the two that might get the special privileges. Those are the two that might get access to special time with the trafficker, or being able to have more food, or maybe get food on a particular day when everyone else isn't allowed to, or someone might be able to take a shower because they have special privileges from the trafficker. So what happens is that um, if, like, a person's in a trafficking situation over the course of years and then they decide to leave the trafficker, it can make it really complicated for the mother to have a relationship with her child, and also down the line potentially co-parent with the trafficker to take care of this child. And so the mother might decide, you know what, like, I'm done with the lifestyle. I realize that I was exploited and manipulated by this person, and this person used me to make money. And I also have this child with this person who hurt me, who also exposed my child and I to this lifestyle. And it can make it hard for someone to mother their child um, if they look like the abuser who harmed them. And in some cases, mothers may also become extremely overprotective of their child after being exposed to being trafficked. So they might not want to let their child go hang out with friends, or be, exposed to certain situations. They might be hyper vigilant, hyper aware, because they might be concerned that they will also get exploited, or that they will also get trafficked. Another thing that we could see, I think we also covered this a little earlier as well, is the direct link to involvement in the sex trade when someone grows up in that situation. So, looking into things like familial trafficking. So, in some situations, parents may directly sell or pimp out their own children for, money, and sometimes for drugs. And there was a study that found that up to 44% of trafficked individuals were pimped by family members, most often parents. It could be also exposure to normalization of sex work. So young people, children might inherit profession of being a sex worker due to lack of other options, or if, like, that's the family business and that's what they're conditioned into doing, they might not look to do anything else. And then in some cases, if someone is turning tricks out of their home, or if they're living in a hotel and they're servicing clients in the same space where their children are, they can also expose those children to being physically or sexually abused by potential buyers. So also tuning in on the attachment piece, which I think this is really important because in the work that I've done with survivors post trafficking experience and as they are beginning to reclaim their lives and rebuild themselves and figure out what it is that they want to do with themselves now that they are out of the life, um, they might have this in between period where they have to figure out how to manage living in a square world. So they have to go from figuring out how to abandon the whole nightlife, which, and a lot of times trafficking, someone might get dropped off at the track like, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they're out there until 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And so having to just reverse getting used to that 9 to 5 schedule. And then also, um, a lot of the time that they're parenting, the trafficker might be watching the child during the day. So it doesn't leave a lot of time for them to interact with their child during daytime hours. And so they might be exhausted if they are trying to also spend time with their children during the day after working with, in some cases with survivors I've worked with, 12 to 14 or 16 hours in any given time period, and then servicing buyers anywhere between 5 to 15 times per night in that time. So usually after coming back from working a track or working overnight with buyers, first thing they want to do when they get in the house is take a shower, in a lot of cases. But if trafficker says, you know what, you were out there for 14 hours and you didn't bring home your quota, the expected money you should have made, you got to go back out there and you got to keep working until you bring home the dollar amount you're supposed to. And if they don't, sometimes they get threatened or beaten. And then in some cases, the traffickers will take the children and leave with them so that the mother will feel obligated to have to go back out and to continue to work because now the trafficker is making an indirect threat to their children. Um, and sometimes they could spend so much time away from their mother that when they do get that time with them, they might be overly attached, not want to let mom go, not feeling safe. And in some cases, they might over sympathize with their parent, the mother, and say, like, they see the abuse that's happening, they see the threats, the coercion, and they might feel distressed themselves watching the mother go through these interactions with the trafficker. Um, and on the other hand, some children will not attach to their mothers. They might be indifferent, they might be disconnected if a lot of the time that could have been spent bonding and connecting mother to child has now been inconsistent and also disrupted. So they might have a difficult time co-regulating themselves and being able to wind down. They might not feel safe in a lot of the home situations, and that could lead to a lot of behaviors that would alert people in school that they are having a difficult time. And some older children who have been exposed to a great deal of stress, violence, and trauma over time can have more complex, contradictory, or sometimes hostile feelings toward their mothers. And I've seen so much of this where, like, teenagers are interacting with their parents who are post trafficking over the course of several years. And what happens is that they feel resentful that they were in that situation, that their mother exposed them to that. They might bring it up during arguments, like, oh, you were a prostitute or you were getting sold, and how could you be with my dad who was a trafficker? And that can also affect their own self esteem. So when it comes to attachment overall, it could be disrupted in several different forms. So one thing I've noticed as well is that looking into like specialized or specific therapy for this particular group, it's very limited. I've worked at a lot of different organizations that work specifically with survivors, and there aren't many support groups or spaces for these children who grew up exposed to trafficking to find familiarity amongst their peers and be able to speak about this. But I have seen it a few times, and I do see healing in community that can happen where they can connect and say like, oh, I grew up seeing a lot of these things and feeling a lot of these things, and being able to work on healing in community. So one of the things that would be great if they're bringing this to light and bringing this um, into public eyes is just knowing that this is a need. This is something that we need. We need survivors to get the services and be able to start their healing journeys and healing process. But we also need these young people who are growing up in these situations to also get specialized services, therapy, or spaces where they can connect with each other. Um, they may also have similar needs with, needing therapy specific towards vicarious trafficking trauma. They might need family therapy, especially if they have a father who is a pimp or a trafficker and a mother who was being exploited by him. Um, and sometimes the psychological consequences can include a variety of mental health related things such as depression, involvement in unhealthy relationships, codependency, anxiety, trauma, cutting self-harm behaviors, substance abuse, and also suicidal ideations. And so, with all of that, and also seeing that a lot of young people are also requesting this, because when parents come in for services for themselves, they very often, if they have a child that grew up in the trafficking situation, it's one of the questions they ask. Hey, do you have can my daughter come and sit in on this session? Do you have capability? Is there someone that can help them understand my experience and what happened to me and how I was manipulated and coerced into the situation by their father? And, sometimes just helping to create that bridge so that they can work on their attachment and work on their relationship. And so far, there's just haven't been too much out there that um, is offering services in this regard. So, looking at impact on development, children born into or experiencing trafficking early in life often suffer long term consequences. Up to 90% of survivors can live with long term mental health. Nearly half of all child trafficking survivors may attempt suicide, developmental delays. So, remember back a few slides, we talked about maybe pregnant mothers not having access to prenatal care, maybe not having um, access to vitamins and things like that. So having um, these situations, sometimes these children can be born with developmental delays. They could be stunted in certain ways. They might not be able to apply age appropriate skills to their everyday. So this could also be an impact. Hypervigilance, trauma symptoms, very similar to that of trafficking survivors. um, if they watched or witnessed their mother getting physically assaulted by their father for not bringing home enough money, they could have heard conversations and know about why the violence is happening, and they could be aware of the situation, and as a result will go through a lot of the similar symptoms. So flashbacks, sleep disorders, different levels of anxiety. I've seen that across the board with children that have witnessed this. And then also, child trafficking can trap victims in a cycle of exploitation. So when they become parents themselves, it can also kind of pass down um, unhealthy, different types of, unhealthy habits moving on into the next generation. So I'm not sure if everyone knew about this before, but as I was kind of revamping this presentation, I started trying to do research into different notable figures that have potentially been exposed to this type of situation, and what that what those findings were was that Richard Pryor, he grew up in his grandmother's brothel, and was surrounded by a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today. So, like violence, addiction, and he did claim that this being influenced by these things helped to influence some of his comedy, some of his upbringing. You know, his mother was actually working as a sex worker, and his father was a pimp, and also he witnessed all kinds of things, including disturbing scenes, his mother performing sex acts with clients. When he was 5 years old, his mother left because of the violence from his father, and then he got custody from, his father got custody of him. By the time he was 10 years old, his mother abandoned him entirely, leaving him to be raised by his grandmother. And also, his upbringing had a lot of physical severity. He witnessed fights between his parents, bathroom brawls in the family-owned tavern, and there was a lot of sex trade activity happening in these things. And although bringing up this example just to say, not that it negatively influenced his career, he still was able to go and become very successful. But sometimes you don't realize that people that you come into contact with actually have this type of upbringing and have been exposed to these things over the course of their life. But it's important to be able to notice that this is something that affects a large amount of people, and be able to bring some light to it. And what are some things that maybe even folks like Richard Pryor could use their platform to say, these are some things that I would have needed or would have been good for me to have when I was experiencing these things and observing these things. So extended family relationships. This has been something that's also a good part of like the post-recovery stuff. It's that relationships with family are very important for healing and for resilience and for folks to be able to get out of the lifestyle if that's what they're choosing to do, right? So in some cases, if someone's leaving a trafficker, leaving a pimp, they might want to go stay with a grandparent or a cousin or someone else. And when there are supportive folks that want to help, that when there are extended family members that want to help provide someone with respite to be able to get into a good situation and to be able to leave a trafficker, I've seen that those situations to be the most successful for survivor recovery and for survivor independence. And so, um, just to read a little bit of the quote here, a child's extended family, so grandparents, aunts, and uncles, were also key to integration. And in some cases, relatives did not accept the child into the family, or at minimum, the child's arrival was a source of tension and stress. You can imagine that if, like a grandparent knows that this child comes from the trafficking situation, some of the tension that that could cause. This was commonly because of concerns about shame, stigma, because the person had returned home with the child, or because it was assumed or actual involvement in prostitution. And sometimes it's not like that at all. Sometimes people are welcomed home. They say, like, okay, like, I understand that you were in this situation, but your family and that's your child, and we're here to accept you and to take care of you. But I've seen that to be a little less common just from my experience. But yeah, having extended family relationships is really, really important to help someone to get out and also stay out of trafficking. So some tips and things that I think are really important for someone to continue to tackle motherhood after being exploited is trying to have a process of self-care in place for the mother's well-being, some, having therapy, having some exposure to healthy coping mechanisms, for mothers to be able to have different types of outlets where they can connect with their own communities. So if their child can have a safe space where they can connect with other children who grew up in trafficking situations is also extremely important for a survivor, a mother who's been exploited through prostitution, to also be able to have access to community. So having a sisterhood of survivors programs that are offered throughout the country, and also here in New York City, programs that are survivor led, that are survivor spaces where survivors can connect to one another and talk about their experiences, but also talk about their journeys, talk about how they were able to move from exploitation into a situation where they feel like they are thriving, where their trauma is not holding them back. It's something that is propelling them to continue to move forward. And so it can be really, really challenging, especially if someone had a child with a trafficker and they also have to stay connected and involved with said trafficker. Um, but it can be done and it is possible. And there can be supports in place for that co-parenting to evolve and to also continue despite, the abuse and trauma. And we do have a slide which speaks to that. So co-parenting with the trafficker, every situation is different. Some cases, some states you have to co-parent with someone, even if they were an abuser to you and to your child. But how you go about it is the personal choice. So it's not easy, but it can be done. And some things that a mother may want to ask themselves is, can they co-parent with an abuser, or more so, how can you parent with an abuser? Um, what if multiple family members are victims of trafficking? I've worked with sometimes sisters, cousins, who were both trafficked by the same person. That can increase the family dynamic and the complexity of the healing process. And so what does that look like? Like, do you still want to have a relationship with a person who is, um, has also been trafficked by the same person as you? And then will that trafficker, knowing that they have children with you, will they try to control you by using the children against you? Will they use them as a tool? Will they try to um, coerce you back into doing things that they are asking of you? Um, and if it is it something you're willing to do? Because in some cases, there's programs that can create spaces for the children to interact with their trafficker, with their father. And so what happens is, in those situations, they can create safe spaces where the mother can drop the child off, let's say at like a police station or at like a family justice center, and then that the child can interact with their parent, and then the mother can pick them up and then continue to not have to have too much face-to-face time with the trafficker. But again, every situation is different. So these are just things that a mother might want to ask themselves and to figure out as in their parenting journey. Also, if the trafficker is free or is a trafficker incarcerated. So I've worked with survivors that have had to, drive to Rikers Island or drive to other prison systems and bring their children there to interact with their father, whether they were locked up for trafficking related charges or something else. Still, comes into play, like, this child, do they want to have a relationship with with the trafficker, knowing that he abused their parent in this way? These are all things that will eventually come up. And how old is a child? Does that play a factor in your decision for how you will co-parent? So there's some quotes that I have here from children who were exposed to trafficking, and often um, some of the feelings can be mixed when it comes from them. So one person said, "You have to let me not feel guilty for wanting to have a relationship with my dad." So even though this person may have trafficked their mom, may have exposed them to different levels of violence, it's still that young person's parent. And so, it can be difficult if mom is saying all these negative things about how they were treated by them and how they were trafficked by them. but at the same time also yearning to have uh, that parent-child relationship. Um, I had a young person who asked their mom, why wouldn't I want to see my parents together? So, also coming from a situation where it's like they want to grow up in some cases where they have a two-parent household. And even though there were certain layers of abuse that happened there, that's still a piece of something that they are wanting or missing from their life. And that even though this situation was based around a trafficking experience, doesn't change the fact that they would want to grow up with both parents involved. And then child asked their mom, does it bother you what he was doing to all those women? And so that particular question comes from a situation where it was a organized trafficking ring, and the trafficker had several people that he was controlling and manipulating into um, paying him on a regular basis. And so, um, growing up and realizing that your father was capable of exploiting so many women, in particular for those who are young women or daughters of traffickers themselves, um, it might bring up things and feelings like, would you traffic me? Would that be something that you would do to your child if you were willing to hurt all these other women? And also maybe even like feelings of like self-esteem, and also trying to figure out how they feel about themselves in regards to, if my father was capable of doing this to these people, what am I capable of? Does something like that also live inside of me? So, I want to thank you all so much for joining today and taking a look into this conversation. And it's just kind of like the tip of the iceberg for what it is that we can start doing for these particular individuals, the services that are needed, bringing to light some of their experiences and bringing to light some of what the needs are for these individuals, and taking a look at how can we try to fill these gaps as service providers and as law enforcement, and as folks who are coming in contact with this population. What are some of the things that we can begin to plan around to also create spaces where healing can happen in community for children who grow up in trafficking situations? So again, thank you for attending Growing Up in the Game. And I'm Jennifer Hammer, and I'm from Rising Ground.